You're listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Here are your hosts, Fran Chismar and Tom Konezik.
I get to talk about my new favorite subject today. Welcome back to Native Plants Healthy Planet, presented by Pinelands Nursery. I am Fran Chismar.
And I'm Tom Konezik. And even though we've had a lot of success with our current Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, we decided to rebrand it, and now it's going to be Philly Cheesesteaks Unhealthy Arteries. That's all Fran's been talking about lately.
That is my new favorite topic. You know, I've been on like these huge cheesesteak pilgrimages, mainly because my youngest son, who's, you know, I say young and it sounds like a kid, but he's 17. He just discovered cheesesteaks.
Which I don't know how you can do that around here.
I don't know either. He was just totally against it. He had tried one when he was a kid and wouldn't try it again. So we finally got him to try one, and he fell in love. So all these years that we had gone to all these places to have cheesesteaks, we're doing it all over. So it's me, my two boys, my fiance, and her son, and we're starting all over again. So that's been our like that hiking and cheesesteaks has been our
completely
our
negates the hike.
Exactly, but
going after.
I will say this though, if you live in the Philadelphia area or surrounding areas, I will take a loaded roasted pork sandwich from DeNick's over a cheesesteak any day. Like you put every cheesesteak, put the top 10 and put it DeNick's roasted pork. I'm going with the roasted pork.
Yeah, and we always have internal arguments here at the nursery about, oh, this is our top 10 list of favorite cheesesteak places, and we never really agree. There'll be some agreements, but there's a lot of disagreements too. But one thing I do agree with you, Fran, is that roast pork sandwich is phenomenal. That's like the real Philadelphia sandwich.
John, are you a meat eater?
Absolutely.
All right, so
Love it.
Now you're more North Jersey, correct?
Yeah,
all right.
I'm up in Warren, Sussex County.
All right, so are you a cheesesteak fan?
I love cheesesteaks.
All right. Do you have?
Well, my question is though. Well, I was going to say to you guys, since you're down there, I mean, because I know I actually caught flack for this being in the Philadelphia area, and I ordered wrong, which was not a good situation. Apparently, you're supposed to ask for Velveeta.
All right,
like Cheese Whiz or some weird, bizarro cheese thing on it.
I am totally against the Cheese Whiz. I'm not.
That's a big thing. Is the Whiz Wit.
The Whiz Wit, yeah.
No, I think Fran and I. This is another place we agree. Is we both go provolone.
We go sharp provolone on ours.
That's what I did. I thought I was doing that right, but I literally got
that's an insider.
I got stares. The whole thing.
It's an insider trick. Is the provolone?
Yeah.
If you're not getting provolone, you're getting the Whiz. You're not from the area.
If you're getting Cheese Whiz on a cheesesteak, that's like wearing jeans to the prom. You're not. You're totally. You're totally missing the point. But we, you know, if you've never had DeNick's, and there's one by us in New Jersey. The original's in Mount Ephraim, New Jersey, but there's one in the Reading Terminal Market in Philly. There's actually a couple now. But they're roasted pork loaded with sweet roasted peppers and sharp provolone.
Yeah, that sounds sweet.
Yeah. All right. You know what? When we get past this quarantine and we can start having guests in, when you're here, we will treat you with a roasted pork loaded. I'll run for lunch and we'll get it. And we'll chow out, and then it won't be much of a conversation because we'll all just be sitting around staring. So, but anyway, I could talk about cheesesteaks all day long, but today I would actually really like to talk about my new favorite subject, which are birds.
Yeah, and what a coincidence. We are going to talk about birds today, and really just one bird in particular. And John, I'm actually going to let you introduce the topic because, I guess I'll give a little bit of background. When I was a kid, we had a little patch of woods behind our house, and you'd always hear this one little call, and I remember learning when I was really young, that was a bobwhite quail.
Yeah.
And then as I grew up, it faded away, but I didn't even notice until I was at a meeting, and there's I don't even remember who it was presenting, but they were saying how the bobwhites had really kind of the populations had shrunk and almost, I don't want to say gone extinct, but they've disappeared from not just our area, but a lot of the U.S. And then it kind of clicked. I'm like, I used to hear them all the time, and I don't even know the last time I heard them. And that's what you guys are doing something about. So, John, why don't you, before we get too far into things, why don't you tell everyone who you are, who you're with, and kind of how you got into what you're doing?
Okay, cool. Yeah, so hey, guys, in the podcast world there, I'm John Park. I'm the Stewardship Project Director with New Jersey Audubon. If you don't know who New Jersey Audubon is, we are a independent Audubon. We are the oldest conservation organization in the state. We've been around since 1897. We helped start National with a bunch of other independents, but like those same independents, we all left National and decided to focus on our states. And more or less, New Jersey Audubon is not just about the birds. We do a lot of work, basically with habitats and all the wildlife that is in there, especially threatened endangered species. And we're talking about that Bob White. The Bob White. Tom, friend, you guys grew up in South Jersey, right?
I actually grew up in the Philly suburbs. I have never seen or heard northern Bob White quail.
Like Tom said, he was down in South Jersey, right? So I mean, they were all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So back in the day, like I remember, like I'm a city boy, and my grandparents though had moved down to the Pine Barrens to retire down there in the 70s. So I remember going down to the Pine Barrens, and like Tom said, like that's where I first heard and saw my first Bob White in that region, and it's the greatest sound in the world, and it's such an iconic thing too, right? That Bob White, that whistle, and that bird kind of it's got such appeal to so many different people. Farmers, birders, just the casual person in the back, like kind of what Tom was saying, you're growing up and you hear that call out there in the woods or out in the field, it just made you feel good. And then over time, people just it just dropped off and no one even noticed. And now we're at a point now where the bird itself, not just in Jersey, it's completely functionally extinct. Wow. Meaning it's gone. And the problem is that whatever remnants were left over the last couple of years, nobody is sure now if they're even wild birds, because so many hunting clubs and even the state were stocking birds for a while, that in the areas that they do pop up, it's pretty much assumed that they are ones that are being stocked on a regular basis. So they're not even the wild species. Mm-hmm. So like I said, Jersey's functionally extinct. And then when you look across the bird's range, everywhere it's kind of tanked. In fact, in North America, it's like an 85% drop in the bird's population across the range. I mean, that's crazy. That's like one of the worst declines of any bird in North America.
Wow.
And it's just not around anymore. Now, the thing was so common; it was everywhere.
No,
so now we're trying to do some work to bring them back to New Jersey, and we're working with a lot of partners in other places across the U.S. to do the same in their states.
All right. Now, I want to talk about this, and we're going to delve into this, but before we do that, first I want to say thank you for you sent my fiance a birding package when I announced on the podcast that we were officially into birding, and I want to thank you for that.
That's cool.
It has gotten a ton of use. And that made her day, and that's really fueled our birding. And for what I do, I'm kind of surprised that we didn't do this sooner. So I was curious, kind of, how did you get your first birding bug? Like, how did you end up at New Jersey Audubon?
Well, like I said, since I was a city boy, my wildlife experiences were few and far between. I grew up in Jersey City.
Okay.
So it was, there was not a whole heck of a lot to look at back then. But my dad was a big wildlife enthusiast, and he would take me hunting and fishing and hiking when I was really young, getting out to the woods. And like I said, going to see my grandparents down in the Pine Barrens. And it was through those experiences that I got excited about wildlife. And that's all I wanted to be around and look for and that kind of thing. And took that into college, got a degree in environmental studies, and always wanted to work with wildlife, and did consulting for a bunch of years, and eventually was volunteering at New Jersey Audubon. And through the connections there and the work that I was doing, parlayed it into a full-time job where now it's like the greatest thing that I've ever. It's so happy to wake up in the morning and know like you want to go to work, and like I can't wait to get to work because it's amazing. The things I see, the people I meet, the projects we work on,
and you get to make a
been
difference.
Really enlightening.
You get to make a difference, which
Yeah,
not
you
everyone
can make a
gets to
difference,
do
right?
in their life. So it's,
Yep.
but that's great. You know, it's funny because we hear so many people saying, as a kid, they started off with this as their natural surroundings, but growing up in the city, I can totally. For me, growing up in the suburbs, Levittown was pretty much a city.
Yeah.
You know, the first time I saw a pheasant, I was beside myself.
Yeah,
I I think since that time in the 80s, I've maybe only seen pheasants 2 more times in my life. You know,
Wow.
speaking of a bird you don't see much anymore. You know, I saw one up near the Hamptons about 2 years ago, and that's pretty much, and one around the corner from me, but it was released. There's a hunt club around the corner from me, so they do some quail and some pheasant. But now through this project, and we want to mention this, it's the Working Lands for Wildlife Partnership. And for our listeners
Yes.
that don't know what that organization is, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Working Lands for Wildlife is really an initiative that the USDA and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, right, NRCS.
Okay.
They're an agency, federal agency, that was created back in the Dust Bowl era. Seriously, I mean, you remember, that whole thing where it actually was a Soil Conservation Service back then.
Okay.
But it's evolved, and now they not only do they do soil and water and fixing erosion issues and soil health and all that, they do wildlife as well. And as part of that program, it's a funding opportunity. And how it works is that the funding programs these particular ones, the Working Lands for Wildlife, focuses on combating, the decline of wildlife species, whose decline we believe can be reversed.
Okay.
All right. So things that they haven't winked out yet, they're not on the verge of winking out. There's enough time that with the right practices and the right technical assistance and putting them and implementing those practices, there's a possibility you can actually save these species. In New Jersey, there's 4 species that we concentrate on.
Okay.
For that particular program. Golden winged warbler,
Which I've never seen. That's one that I've never seen.
I got to see the second one in my life this year on a project we did up in Sparta Mountain, and where we did forest cuts, and it took 6 years, but we finally got our first one in the cut this year, so we're very excited. So golden winged warbler,
Okay.
American black duck, believe it or not, something you think is so super common, and it's not anymore.
Wow.
And bog turtle,
Okay.
and then the last one is northern bobwhite quail.
And we're going to focus on that one today.
We're going to focus on the quail one today. Yes.
So you had mentioned that the decline has been 85%. I guess is that? I originally thought that was maybe over the last 50 years. Is it really more front end loaded? Like, has it really been over the last 10 years?
No, it's been over the last 50 years. I mean, those to get that number, and you can see it when you start looking at the trends in farming development that's happened. It all comes back to the habitat loss.
Okay.
And so over that time, as things got more mechanized in farming, when every inch of the the field is now being utilized as opposed to when we all were growing up, and the farmers would leave those little weed spots and tractor turnarounds and all that kind of stuff in weeds. It's in production, and the habitat's gone. And then when you think about what happened, especially in New Jersey, right, with the development booms that happened throughout the 80s and 90s and 2000, I mean, we've lost a lot of ground, and it's not conducive anymore to not just Bob White, but a whole suite of species that need that early successional young forest weedy patches.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask. What is the ideal habitat for quail? What do they prefer? Where do they breed, and what do they need to exist?
Yeah. So for quail, they need a really diverse mix of vegetation. There's actually data out there that when you try to do habitat management, they ask to look at a spot and try to think of it as 1/3 forbs and legumes, 1/3 grasses, and 1/3 low woody species.
Okay.
And then the other thing is, so when you think about what that looks like, think about like an open pine savanna, right? Or, grassland kind of area. But the key to that whole thing too is they also need a bit of bare ground.
Okay.
And when you think about that, why would you need that? It comes down to the chicks and how they get around and move, and where the adults are able to nest. So you think about, if you put all that together, what do you wind up with? It's like those shrubby areas, greenbrier, blackberry, plum thickets, oak scrub. Again, the pine savanna kind of look. It's those kind of things where they can find forage, escape cover, and able to rear the chicks.
And those conditions that you just named or mentioned don't really exist too much. It's like when I do see thickets, it's invasives. It's not. Yeah. It's not the species that you mentioned. It's invasive species. So I can see how that habitat has kind of disappeared and loss of habitat. You can go through any episode of our podcast, and that's that.
Yeah, it always comes back to the same thing, right? We lost a ton of habitat here in Jersey, and now we're trying to make up for it. And between the development and then all the other things that have happened over the years with climate change issues, the pests that come in and change up the structure, the suppression of fires, the mitigation of beaver dams, all the things that were disturbance related and all, which created those habitat types, they've been all taken out of the system or gone.
Yeah.
And you lose all this amazing cover, and it translates down to all these little things that you took for granted, like I'm sure on the other podcasts, right, with the loss of milkweed and the loss of those little weedy areas we were talking about. And that was the key to a lot of the food chain. It was the key to a lot of these species even surviving, and that's where we're at right now. I think, I forget what the number is exactly, but the last time I looked in New Jersey, the threatened endangered species that were out there, it was something like 41 or 45% of the animals that were listed were all species that needed some kind of early successional young forest habitat. Because that, like you said, Fran, it's not there anymore.
No,
it's just, it's allowed to grow up or allowed, but it's never being replaced. And when you take out those, those disturbance factors, especially in the pine barrens, I mean, you think that'd be a slam dunk, right, for habitat down there, given it's a disturbance-driven system. It still isn't enough because we don't have the kind of management that we were, hoping for.
No, when you see open fields that are starting to turn into early succession forests around here, I wish I was exaggerating. You can't see through it because of calorie pair, and they're just taking that over to the point where, they're probably coming up like 6 inches to a foot apart. And it's so thick with that, and it's taking over, or other invasives in those areas, and they're not being managed at all. They're being thought to be left to return to the wild, but they're really not.
And I forget if we discussed it on the podcast or it was through our video series that we were working on, that a lot of people drive by that and don't even see a problem. They don't, or I shouldn't say they don't see a problem. They don't recognize that it's a problem.
No,
they
don't
just don't know
the
the plants. And I even had a conversation when all the pears were blooming back in, was that March, I guess?
Yeah.
And with a friend, and I was like, he's complaining about his pear tree that he actually had that was not a Bradford pear. And I was like, well, you got all those Bradford pears across the street they're an issue. Like, but he up until that point, he didn't even know that was a thing.
That was
he
an
thought
issue.
it was almost beautiful in a way. So,
do you are the increase in deer and what with all the increased edge habitat and what they've been eating, is the increased amount of deer, are they reducing the amount of habitat as well that the quail will?
Well, they definitely play. They definitely play into it, Fran. I mean, there's a lot of factors. It's funny to us too, and the more we dive into this at Audubon, we're finding it's a couple things. Obviously, deer are a major issue in this state.
Okay.
But depending on where you pick projects, you got to factor them in. But you might be able to lessen their impact if you're working at scale and doing some of the practices that try to stimulate growth. Like even with the forestry work that we've been doing, have been picking projects that based on the research, we know we're going to get good regeneration if we do things at scale. So think about this as like, if you pick the right site and you clear out a 10-acre piece and you're trying to stimulate the regeneration, 10 acres versus something that's small like a quarter acre, the scale-wise in those things, it becomes, when you open it up to the sunlight getting down and letting it actually stimulate the seed bank, and you get that big push of plants regenerating, it overwhelms the deer to the point where you might have some browse, but not to the point where it can't overcome it. But what we've seen in smaller cuts, saying, okay, maybe some folks think that I'm going to do a small cut because I don't want to deal with invasives and everything else coming in. It turns into a food plot because now you got a smaller area that the deer come in, and when you have that regeneration comes in, it just kind of funnels them into one spot. Yeah. On a 10-acre cut, though, you don't even notice the browse, if any, because everything is kind of coming in and overwhelmed, and you're able to get that habitat without really worrying about it. Same thing with the invasives. When you think about, depending on where you are, too, you can't just do this everywhere. But when you do those kind of cuts and you get the regeneration you want, a lot of times, and this happened to us up in Florida, too, is a lot of times it's all native stuff that comes in that overwhelms and never even gets a chance for some of these other things to establish.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of factors. But the main thing that we're seeing is it really comes down to sunlight. Some of these forests, they're overstocked. There's no way that regeneration can work because the ones that are making it through in these shady conditions are then picked off real easy by deer. Well,
I was going to ask, what are their natural predator? Like, what are
for the quail?
Yeah.
So for quail, these poor things get it from all sides. I mean, it's horrible. They're so low in the food chain. Because they're getting whacked from all the mesopredators, right? So anything from coyotes and bobcats and fox to all the other stuff, they're all like the nest predators, right? So raccoons, possums, skunks. Down south, it's armadillos. The problems we saw too, the amount of snakes that were eating not just the eggs, but they were even taking some of the birds.
Wow.
I remember even looking at some of the literature from one of our partners, Tall Timbers, down in Tallahassee, and they had photos of bullfrogs eating the chicks. So you think about this, and on top of that, then you got aerial predators, right? The hawks, the owls, all these things coming from the top. So everywhere you look, everything is a predator kind of to quail. These things are. They're really up against some pretty tough odds.
So without the habitat, they can't survive.
No, and that's just it. I mean, you got to look for habitat that's giving them that, that cover from not just the raccoons and stuff. I mean, even from the air. So, woody vegetation like low bush blueberry, huckleberry, that kind of stuff provides really good cover for them. Because again, when you think about the structure of those plants, right?
Yeah.
They're a lot of woody stems, they're close to the ground, but they're not as close to the ground where those birds can move along the bottoms, really quickly throughout the, in and out, because it's still bare ground under the plant. But they're actually getting the cover from top for the woody stems that the aerial predators can come down and get them.
And where it's natural habitat for low bush blueberry, if it's right, like if you're in, say, southern New Jersey, the Pine Barrens, it's almost like a ground cover. Like you can't see that forest floor.
But when you get down at quail level and look on the ground and through the bottom of those plants, we've done this. It's pretty wild. You realize that it's like this open lanes everywhere. I remember taking like a baseball, and like you could kind of if you could roll it through the bottom, you could say, wow. I mean, if you can get a baseball through the bottom of that, it's by rolling it. Yeah, that's a perfect area for the size of the quail to maneuver, but yet it still had to protect the cover on the top from the stems.
Now I'm going to have to try that. I'm going to make sure I have a tennis ball with me.
You mentioned some of the key species that quail need for habitat. But I want to dive into it a little bit further and just say, what are the ones that are most important for their diet? What plants?
Oh, native plants, sure.
What are attracting the things that they might eat? I'm not even sure what quail eat. I'm assuming it's seeds and insects.
So they'll eat both seeds and insects, fruit. So when they're young, obviously the chicks, they're just feeding strictly on insects, until they get a little bit older. Then they'll eat seeds. But
okay.
Things that produce hard and soft mast, right? So everything from blueberries, huckleberries, bayberry, elderberry, blackberries, beach plums, native sumacs, and then when you get into the herbaceous stuff, partridge peas, a real big one that they love, wild indigo, native lespedesias, tick trefoils, another real big one.
Okay.
So Bidens, milk peas, and then the other part to all that, nut rushes, broom sedge. But the other part to that, too, is also the cover. So things like switchgrass, little blue stem, big blue stem, I think it's a broom sedge. They're really important for the whole thing, for both foliage, but also the cover and nesting material.
Okay. So we talked about the decline. We've talked about all the challenges that quail faces, but and where they're at. But it doesn't mean that it's all doom and gloom. There's a lot of good work being done. So, what can be done to fix it? Like I know that's part of what we've been talking about with the Working Lands for Wildlife Partnership. What are some of the things that they're doing to help improve habitat for quail?
Right. So in the Working Lands for Wildlife, they have a bunch of practices, okay, that they'll provide landowners and farmers with, technical advice on how to do it. But also through Working Lands, if you're accepted into that program, comes funding opportunities where they'll pay you cost shares. They'll actually give you money to do these practices.
Okay.
And so some of the practices to help restore and improve the habitat are things like forest stewardship planning for your woodlots, on how to cut certain things at certain times and adjust the type of species, vegetation species that are in your area. Brush management, again, it's a lot of it is cutting and planting.
Okay.
But also there's another big practice that goes along with it, and this is the stewardship end of things, because once you've done all your cutting and planting and getting it the way you want it, you've got to maintain, right? And you also got to maintain the diversity of that forest or that brush area. So one of the cool things that they pay for too is prescribed burning. And in the Pine Barrens, this serves as dual purposes for not just habitat for quail and a bunch of other species, but let's face it, guys. I mean, fuel loads in the Pine Barrens for the wildfire risk is pretty high.
Yeah.
As we've seen the last couple of years, right? Some of the fires that broke out in the Pygmy Pines, that was 12,000 acres. Then we had another one this year, right? It was 6,000.
Yeah.
So by doing this work, where you're doing, where you're manipulating some of the woodland to try to regenerate a young forest and plant the right stuff for the habitat for these birds, you're also, through controlled burning, reducing the fuel loads that go along with all of that, and then also creating areas for those birds to, be able to nest in and forage in and raise their broods.
Now, has this program been successful? Has it been popular?
Yeah, in fact, it's one of the more popular ones out there. Quick story about it, which was amazing to me, and this is really the good work of Division of Fish and Wildlife in New Jersey, was that when we started doing the first project with translocating wild birds from Georgia up to the Pine Barrens through the study that we were doing at Pine Island, Cranberry, right smack in the middle of the Pine Barrens region, where we were bringing up birds and we were testing practice to see whether or not you could bring birds from southern latitudes up here, repopulate an area. Would they adjust, that whole thing? But what was neat was, as we were doing that project, Division of Fish and Wildlife actually saw an opportunity, and working with NRCS through the Working Lands for Wildlife project, they were able to convince the feds to include Bob White in the project just because, now think about this, the other states that got the funding, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, they all have existing quail populations. New Jersey doesn't.
Wow.
But we got such a response from the public who want to see this bird back on the landscape for kind of reasons too. You know, like Tom said, they remember it from back in the day, and they were like, wow, I can't believe this is going. It's part of our heritage, part of growing up here. That the response was so unbelievable. I would get calls all the time. How do I get quail on my property? You know, what can I do to help it? That we were able to, you know, actually get a federal funding source to help these people out with providing funds to buy the right plants, do the right management. So yeah, it's been really popular and really successful because we've gotten a ton of people to sign up for practices that on their own they either would not been able to do or fund, but also, especially in the Pine Barrens, it caught on really big because of the idea that they wanted to see the birds back, but it also helped with fuel load reductions for wildfires. So we were getting the benefit of a lot of different things through that funding and through this initiative, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's all good, important practices, not just for quail. Also, I mean, to get people to be active stewards are pretty important, especially for large property owners to take that initiative. Is
a lot of people forget, Fran. I mean, that stewardship is part of the whole thing. It's one thing to go out and preserve a property. Okay, it's great, preserved it up. But if you don't do anything with it, or even if you're in your house, you think of it as a house, right? You buy a house, you don't just let it go to pot. After a while, you got to improve it a little bit. You got to fix it up a tad. It's the same thing. Yeah. It's the exact same thing. And it really, this helped really push this concept of taking care of it in the long term and helping you out to actually get that habitat and all these ancillary benefits out of the program, which is great.
And how many years has the program been going at this point?
So Working Lands for Wildlife has been around for 4 years, and the quail project that we started with Tall Timbers, Pine Island, Pine Creek Forestry, and University of Delaware, that started about 8 years ago.
Okay.
So yeah, we started it off, got it all going, and then they got the funding, and now we're in that mode where we're signing up people left and right, especially in the Pinelands, for the project, and the applications are soon. So yeah, that's something we want to push out there.
And we're definitely going to mention that at the end of the
because it's a cool thing and an easy thing to be a part of.
So what are some of the success stories? Have you seen quail? So
success is, I'd say things are a success. It all depends on how you look at it, right? Yes. Because the original project was the Division of Fish and Wildlife had come up with an action plan because they recognized the same thing that we saw years ago, that the species was winking out.
Okay.
And along with those species, the quail, a lot of other early successionals were winking out. So they came up with an action plan to look at it, see where in the state was it really possible to do work, and then if you did the work, how would you get the populations up? We took that plan, looked at where that they thought the best spots were, and decided to work in the Pine Barrens.
Okay.
Pine Barrens offered a lot of good things, right? It offered regulations that kind of limited development. It It also had the habitat type that we were looking for. And the other thing, too, was burning was essential part of quail management. And the Pine Barrens, again, given that disturbance system that's based in burning, it just seemed like it would fit, right? So we partnered with a couple different people. The biggest one was Pine Island Cranberry Company. They're a company, they own about 14,000 acres in the Pine Barrens, which is huge.
I mean, there's a little bit of New Jersey history here, but I don't know if we're the number one. I think we're like top 3 for cranberry producing states in the country.
Correct.
And Pine Island, I think, might be the largest producer in the country.
I think they're the largest. They're definitely the largest in the state.
In New Jersey.
Yeah.
But they're. I think they're the ones sometimes when you see the Ocean Spray commercials, every once in a while it's one of them that's on the bottle or in the bog or on TV.
Yeah, I have seen a Hanes on the back of a bottle. Yep. Yes, I have seen that. Yes, yeah, awesome family to work with, and the beauty of it was, again, a large property, but and this is the key, they were already doing stewardship on their property for a forest stewardship plan that Pine Creek Forestry had written up. And when we looked at this property with other quail folks, again, University of Delaware we brought in experts from Tall Timbers Research Facility down in Tallahassee, who are like the guys. They are the gods of quail translocation and fire ecology. We brought them up to look at the site, and they said, this is the perfect situation to try something where the only birds that are being given up for translocation in the entire U.S. Are down in Florida and Georgia. They have the populations that they can actually take birds out, put them somewhere else to try to start stuff.
I was actually going to ask you that question. Is there a difference genetically between the birds in Georgia and Florida than what you would have found in New Jersey?
So the ones up here, theoretically, when you want to have translocation, you want to try to get a species that, I say as close to the same latitude that your project area is going to be.
Okay.
That's why this is an issue, because the birds up north, they weigh a lot more. They're a little heavier stocked, and they've adapted to the climate conditions up here, right?
Gotcha.
But if you don't have that to give up, so you got to start looking other places.
Yeah.
So when you think about this, like I said before, they're tanking across the entire range. If that's the only place that there's a possibility of even getting enough birds to bring up, you don't want to waste it and bring up 800 birds up here and they all drop dead on you because they couldn't handle it. So what we were looking with, the experiment was bringing up 80 birds a year, 40 pair.
Which isn't a lot. Which isn't.
It's not a lot.
No, it's not a lot.
No. So we were looking to start the population over. What we were looking to do is, can these birds make it in from the southern latitude up here? Can they adapt to what we have going on in the Pine Barrens? How they nest? How they deal with predators? All that good stuff, just to prove that could work and see what the population dynamics would work out with having them. So every one of those birds, when we would bring them up, they all had radio collars. They all were tested for diseases before they came up. They all had leg bands identifying them. So we would release them on Pine Island, who was doing the stewardship already through their forest stewardship plan, creating great habitat on the property. Monitor them. We had hired two grad students, one in his doctorate, the other one in the master's, to basically tail these things everywhere they went all around and figure out, where they went, what they did, and can they make it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the results actually are sitting at the Wildlife Society's journal right now. They accepted it for publication. They just have to tweak it some. Okay. But at the end of the day, it turned out that, yes, the birds from down south can make it up here in New Jersey. That's a big step. Because at least now you can pull off a translocation. The thing that was screwy, though, and we're still trying to figure it out, and that's the next phase of this, is they didn't, they were like delayed in their nesting, like by 2-3 weeks, which it kind of, that they couldn't figure out why. One of the things they think might be an issue is the translocation itself, having drive them all the way up here, and you got about 36 hours to get them out into the field. Was that going to impact them? But at the end of the day, what we were finding was the birds were nesting. The birds did, do two broods. We had males incubating the nest when the females were killed. Okay. All the things that you're supposed to do, and it turned out, we got some pretty decent numbers.
Awesome.
I mean, out of the 320 birds that we released over the 4-year program, we had 47 nests confirmed, which was the first wild bobwhite quail nesting in the pine since the 80s.
Wow.
We had 173 confirmed chicks that hatched. We monitored them that they did overwinter, so they didn't all get wiped out.
Okay.
We even had it where we were able to determine that bobwhite quail from the previous year's release were pairing with the newly released birds. So they were hooking, they were finding each other, they were bringing them out. So this was a big deal, and we're at a point now where you have all these other landowners now seeing that it can work, wanting to be a part of it, that, they sign up for the program and we start doing work on their properties. And then this year, when you asked about seeing birds, I got a call from Bill Haynes at Pine Island that he was at a next-door neighbor's property, and they were listening to bobwhites calling in the field. Wow. So I went down there and met with the guy who was another Cranberry producer, and sure enough, we wound up seeing quail out in his blueberry fields.
That is
and
awesome.
The question is now, are these their progeny from the Pine Island stuff? Because we stopped doing translocation last year.
Okay.
But they're there, so that's a good sign.
That's a great sign.
So we're pretty stoked.
Another thing I'll point out before we get too far away from that topic is in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, a neighbor property isn't like in your development where your neighbor's 50 yards away.
Right.
Especially with Pine Island, your neighbor could be miles away at that point.
Yeah.
So that it's on a neighbor's property actually says quite a bit. It's not like you're close.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was kind of neat. I mean, we actually tracked one of our birds during the project that went a total of 7 miles to another spot. I mean, that's extreme for them to get that far.
Wow.
But we did have them moving around and searching for other areas and all that. So, we even found them, they were hopping the fence and going into Warren Grove even. So, I mean, they were moving around, but it's all about the habitat, right? So if they're finding the right spots and they're making it, that's what we were looking for. And now we have that particular landowner who now wants to sign up for the program because he's seeing this momentum. He's seeing all this cool stuff. And the best thing that he told me was, this guy's a 5th-generation farmer. He goes, I remember the days when we were sitting out on the porch with my father and my grandfather, and they would whistle, and the quail would whistle back. He goes, and now I have it all back again. 30 years later, here I am listening to it. The guy was excited and into it, and you had to love it. And it was the best.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
So you mentioned before there's a lot of people excited about this, and and I'd extend that to even people who aren't from New Jersey that are excited about it, because I mentioned before when I first heard about this reintroduction, it wasn't from someone in New Jersey. It was actually from someone from Tennessee, who they were giving a presentation on bobwhite quail, I kind of told them that same story I started out with. When I used to hear them all the time, I didn't even notice that I didn't hear them anymore.
Right.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, well you're getting a reintroduction right in your backyard," and he told me all about this project. I didn't even know. I think this was probably in like year 1 or 2 when it started. He was so fired up that this was happening. And it was 1,000 miles away from where he lived. And I've had that same conversation with people from Georgia and Kentucky and all over the place. And they're all excited that we're going from almost a population of 0 or a population of 0 to something moderately significant.
And what's interesting to me is that the excitement that people are expressing isn't because it's an animal that they want to hunt. They're just the romanticism of it is
exactly. Yeah, friend, that's exactly it. They remember that sound. Like I said, when I was a kid, I was in my grandparents' house. I remember hearing that or asking my grandmother, while looking at this little goofy bird come out of the hedgerow and hit a bird field and then run back in. But I remember that so vividly, and it was so cool. And that's what these guys are remembering back in the day. That sound of the bobwhite, and then let me tell you, again, even with Bill Haynes had told me, when you start noticing the stuff for the quail, all of a sudden you start noticing all those other things that you kind of forgot about. That, hey, all of a sudden I'm starting to see a lot more nighthawks going around. Well, it's because your manager for quail is bringing those in. Hey, I'm checking out a lot more butterflies these days. Well, it's because your manager for quail is bringing those in. And it's really cool, and it's an eye-opener to a lot of the folks down there that just kind of took a lot for granted. You can't blame them doing day-to-day stuff. You forget about it. But then when you stop and slow down, it's like, oh my God, look what's around me. And it's all because they planted the right thing. They managed the property a little bit different, maybe cut back the invasives, and all of a sudden you got a whole wonderland right in the backyard. It's looking amazing.
And what I love about the program too, and this is something that Tom touched on in the last episode with his final thought, is that it wasn't just one organization that did this. A lot of people worked together to make this happen. And that's the important thing, because like Tom had mentioned, so many people are working towards the same goal, maybe for different reasons, but it's the same goal, and a lot more could be accomplished if those organizations could work together. And I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we started off a little doom and gloom talking about the state of the quail, but we're ending it really with some great news. And the best thing is the next round of funding is coming out, so to give even more habitat for that. So if there's private landowners or even someone from the public that wants to get involved, what's the next step for people for this?
So the next step, now here's one caveat, okay, is that the Working Lands Wildlife Program, like I said, is an NRCS program, and it has those 4 species that you can apply for funding: bog turtle, golden wing, bob white, and black duck. For bob white, though, there is a demarcation land in the state, and basically everything below Route 195 is eligible, more or less, okay? So you got to keep that in mind.
Okay.
For quail. Yeah. The other species, though, they also, there's other places that you can do that too. So I would say just check with NRCS. But for the quail stuff, all right, if you're below that line, you can easily look at the New Jersey NRCS website under the programs and look for Working Lands. Okay. But you can also contact New Jersey Audubon and me at my email address, which is John, JOHN.Park, PARKE @NJAUDUBON.org, and I can help you out with it. And also, we partner, as Fran was saying too, with other agencies. Quail Forever, Austin Damager, who also works in the NRCS office in Columbus, also handles the project as well. So he's another contact to look for. But a lot of the stuff is available online, or contact the New Jersey Audubon and getting a hold of me, and we can come out to the property, take a look at it, see if you're eligible for the funding. Even if you're not even eligible, we could still make recommendations for, what you can do on the property to, if not for quail, but to benefit for, other wildlife or just native habitat improvements.
And we're going to try to put as many of these links on the website when we publish this. So if people go to www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com, we'll list as many of those as we can.
Nice.
How is there an end in sight for this program, or right now it's a healthy program and the funding's there that it can keep going?
Well, it's a healthy program right now. This program is attached to the Farm Bill. So every 4 years when the Farm Bill comes up for renewal, that's when a lot of people come out to make sure that you don't lose this kind of funding. The funding itself is through another funding mechanism in USDA.
Okay.
And it seems to be funded on a pretty regular basis because it's their one of their biggest programs. So I think we're good for a while. But again, even if it's not through NRCS, there's also other programs. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, where they give a lot of they give materials in some cases out for restoration, or they'll lend you a seed drill, that kind of thing. Not so much for quail, because quail's a non-migratory species. They deal with a lot of migratory.
Okay.
But you can, when you are doing habitat work, don't think about just single species selection. When you're thinking about it, think about all those species that work it. So when you're doing work for just quail, prairie warblers, nighthawks, box turtles, pine snakes, all these different things come into play because they're going to work with that type of habitat you're maintaining for quail.
And that's, we've been preaching since the beginning, ecosystem and habitat and what all that needs to survive, not just one species, every species.
Yes.
You need that balance, and it's nice to see that we're working on trying to restore that balance so it can benefit the quail. That would be wonderful.
And I'll tell you what, Fran, it's amazing. Like the stuff I got to see spending time in the Pine Barrens every day on that project and looking at the different species that were utilizing the habitats. I saw stuff that I've only seen in books that were showing up or growing or whatever in those spaces, and it would blow my mind. And it was incredible. I mean, the diversity was amazing. And all it took was maybe clearing a little bit area here, allowing the sun to come in, getting things to grow a little bit, maybe plant some things here and there to get it going, do a burn, and oh my God, it was like you didn't even you couldn't believe you were in New Jersey. Like it didn't feel like New Jersey.
Wow.
It was wild.
I can imagine the excitement with that. And Tom knows this because I shared this in our Facebook group for the podcast. I got excited over a feather that I found in my yard yesterday.
About feathers. You kidding me?
That I had no idea what it was, and that's what was exciting to me. It turned out to be a tail feather from a northern flicker.
Oh, cool.
So and I wish I had seen it, but instead I just found the feather. But I was like, I have never seen a feather like this before. What is this from? Like I was just.
It's good, man.
Yeah, it's all fun stuff. So we always end up the podcast with two things. We end it with a final thought where everyone gets the stage to say whatever they want. But we always ask one last question, which is, what is your favorite native plant? Now we will offer, if you'd rather give a favorite bird, it can be a favorite bird or a favorite native plant.
I'm down with native plants. I love them. So, and I got one. I have one. This is my go-to everywhere. It's the best. It's sweet pepperbush, clether. I mean, I can't beat that. That smell, that fragrance. I mean, you'll never forget it, man. It's the greatest in the world. And the bonus is, it's like chocolate cake for hummingbirds and butterflies, right?
Yeah. And I actually just planted a few in my fiance's yard this past weekend. So she's that and some Virginia sweet spire, actually some elderberry too. So so we're trying to create much better habitat ourselves. So that's a great choice. Good fall color, nice summer flower. So many benefits for that.
Yeah, and I mean, and I see it everywhere. I see it in the pines. I see it up here in North Jersey. I see it down in the coastline. I mean, it's pretty. It's pretty resilient, and you can get a little bit out of control if you let it go. But I tell you, I don't mind it because God, that smell is just amazing.
It really is.
Oh man,
really, that's a great
Love
choice.
it.
But they're all good choices. I don't like. I would like you would ever hear me say, "Oh, that's yeah." I was like, "That's not going to happen." But that's
except for Marcus Gray's dad with his red cedar Christmas trees. We did kind of
that was a bad. Yeah, he was saying it was because of the area. That's what people use. But as for the first episode, we decided to bring in, because we were going to do it.
We had video as well,
and we kind of changed our mind with that, but we brought in 2 big 7-gallon Eastern Red Cedars, and then I put them in the conference room and closed the door. And when I came back in, it was like someone smacked me across the head with a litter box. It was, we're like, this is great plant, just not for indoors, not for a Christmas tree. But Marcus has really good fond memories of that. Yeah. So
that's pretty cool.
So I will leave that with him. I'm not going to adopt that tradition. All right. So any final thought? We kind of give you the stage where you can sum up, you can add anything, you can pitch anything, whatever you want. The floor is yours. You can say whatever you want.
All right. So I guess the big thing is if there's any takeaway, right? Because I know that again, when we start promoting stuff at Quail, I usually get a million calls about, how do I get quail on my property? And what I tell everybody is, look, as a landowner, just do good stewardship on your property. Ask the state and other land trusts and stuff that you see out there to do the same with theirs. And just be a good steward of the land. It doesn't have to be just for one species. Think of it holistic. And if you're doing that, then you're doing your part to keep, areas in New Jersey wild and keeping our great wildlife species here. Because I'm going to tell you right now, people don't realize it, but New Jersey, we are blessed with the amount of biodiversity, species-wise. It's unbelievable what we have here, and it's because we have so many different habitat types, and it's just an amazing state to be in. So, don't worry about if you don't get a quail, but be happy when you get something else because of the actions you took on that property. It's all good.
Yeah, totally. The great thought. And New Jersey is diverse, and the more that we venture out and to some of these destinations, you realize how lucky we are with all the different ecosystems that we have.
Yeah.
And it's, quail are great. There's a lot of great things, though, and anything you can do to help to restore that balance is wonderful.
Absolutely.
Tom, would you like to go next, or you want me to go?
I'm going to tell a short story, then have my final thought.
All right, okay.
But
all right,
when I started thinking about, all these people from all over the place have been excited about quail in New Jersey. Another guy I should have mentioned before, I was actually on a trip to New Mexico, and it just happened to be me and the owner of this business were in the car, and somehow we started talking about cranberries, and I think we were talking about this whole quail project, how cool it was. And then he's just like,
in Mexico?
This is in New Mexico, yeah.
In New Mexico.
And like dry area,
yeah.
7,000 feet of elevation. Like there's just barely any vegetation there at all. And he's like, why are those knuckleheads always standing in the middle of the water with all the cranberries? And I had to explain like the whole cranberry harvest because he just didn't know that was even a thing. He thought it was just a marketing ploy to get these guys in waders standing in the water.
No, that's real farming, guys.
Yeah, but my final thought is, when we started this podcast, the main goal was to really highlight some of the organizations that we get to work with that are doing great work, and I think all of them have been nonprofits. If not all, most of them. That was the goal, was to feature nonprofits that need your volunteer time, need your dollars, just need your help. And hopefully we got connected our listeners with organizations they wanted to get involved with, something they're passionate about. And one of the things that I think we missed when we were thinking about this is you also have to get involved in politics a little bit. And it's something that's happening in our town right now is our township committee is trying to get rid of our environmental commission. And they're considered almost like a nuisance to some of the things they're trying to do. And I know they have bigger problems than I can even comprehend, but in addition to getting involved with some of these groups, you got to stand up for what you're believing and stand up for what's going on in your town, and make sure that when something you don't necessarily like they're trying to get rid of the environmental commission or something like that, you gotta raise your voice. And I know we have listeners who are actually probably the loudest voices for that in our town right now, and I want to congratulate them for doing it. And I know we're trying to step up to the plate with that as well.
It's very hard because I look at this town as a farm community, and it's evolved over the years. But it's at heart, it's a farm community. But the newest crop seems to be warehouses, and it's tough to see the change because I honestly felt that this was an area that would never change.
Yeah, and I was just doing, whenever I give presentations, a lot of times I talk about pollinators and pollinator decline, and a lot of people like to point the fingers with pollinator decline and say, oh, well, it's what the farms are doing, or it's what this people do. It's really, we've developed a lot. And you look at just our town of Columbus, when I was born, so I'm 31, when I was born, the town population was about 3,000, is now 8,500 people. And a lot of that, it was like 3,000 up until I think I was in probably just getting into middle school or high school. Yeah. So when I was 12, 13, 14, and then it just kind of blew up. And not to say that's a bad thing, but you think about all the people that are moving into those houses. You have bigger houses, more lawn, more edge habitat, which raises how many deer you have,
more chemicals,
less habitat for pollinators, not just pollinators, but you're finding out quail as well. And we have to be cognizant of those things. We got to do things because we're human, but we have to be cognizant of the impacts we have on the environment as well.
When you see a community more than double in size in less than 10, 15 years, that's when you need to really evaluate your environmental impacts, not do away with that commission. Now is when you need it most.
Yeah.
So everyone who's doing all the good work for that, kudos, because it's important.
Well, Tom, like you were saying, Tom, one thing too that I want to play off to what you said too about the farming community. Listen, man, farmers, they're the stewards of the land, all right? And if you're losing your farming, you're losing a huge piece of, not just natural heritage, but all those ecological services and the food chain, everything the food production. You got to support local guys. Because I'm telling you right now, if it wasn't for the private landowners and the farmers there, none of these programs would be out there, right? I mean, they'd just be fall apart. And it's those folks, the farmers, the Pine Island Cranberry guys of the world, and all of them that thank God that they're doing this kind of stuff to maintain not just the wildlife to them is almost ancillary, right? It's like a secondary benefit, but you don't even realize as a neighbor, they're basically helping you out with water purification, soil health, air quality. And it's so important to make sure people get that you don't want to lose your agriculture, whatever you do.
Yeah.
And I'll even, with talking about Pine Island, it's not what you guys are doing there with the working lands. They don't have to do that. There's a little bit of reward because I guess they're getting a little bit of money from it, but if they focused on the agriculture, they'd probably make more money than what they'd get through that. But
here's a little tidbit. Pine Island is not part of the Working Lands for Wildlife. They were doing stuff on their own to the point where they were like, listen, we can do this. We've been doing it. There's a phenomenal quote from Stephanie Haynes that she gave. I don't want to paraphrase it, that she gave one time, and she said that our farm, we've always had this mentality of we have to help the water, we have to help the forest, we have to help the crops, and if we're doing all of that kind of stuff and the quail are able to survive, then we know we're doing our job. And I was like, man, that's the way to go, because they inherently were doing this for the farm, and through those practices, that region, that the neighborhood, the animals that were on, we're all benefiting. And you don't benefit that when you drop a warehouse back on top of a farm field.
No, you get the opposite.
Not good.
And again, talking about farmers, I've seen a lot of farmers kind of have that same mentality. They don't have to do a lot of the environmental stuff they do, and a lot of times when they don't do it, it's because they're already working with like razor thin margins on stuff. I know cranberries in particular, they're experiencing some of their lowest prices in probably generations. It was years and then decades. It might be generations now. And same thing with corn and soybeans and all these things. They're already operating on such thin margins and they get a bad reputation for a lot of things. And a lot of times they might not even know, but I think a lot of them are concerned. They're definitely concerned about the soil and the water, and maybe they don't always take the right approach, but they are thinking about it, which is more than a lot of people are.
And they're not just working with one organization either, because we're working with cranberry growers, working with Xerces to help improve pollinator habitat. There's a lot of great organizations that these farmers are using to do the right thing that they don't really have to do. So
well, all I can tell you is the cranberry guys, that whole industry that I've been working with, they've embraced this kind of stuff. They're doing great work, and we've been really excited about working with them. And I see all those things happening. Like you said, they don't have to do it, but they recognize the benefits from it, and it's impressive. We've been really, really happy. But again, so the word is support your local guys is what I'm trying to get out there, because you hit it on the head, Tom. It's important, or you're going to lose even more.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. So get involved, whether it's just with organizations. Dive into politics a little bit. Sit in on your township committee meetings, and just so you know what's going on. You need to know what's going on and stand up for what you think is important.
Yes.
Yeah, and make sure you do your own research. I can tell you this, again, there is a lot of organizations out there and a lot of different opinions and a lot of different methodologies. It's all good to listen to all sides, but make sure you're doing your own research and don't just jump on a bandwagon because you think it might be good. You'd be surprised when you dig in sometimes. You really got to know. You got to know the particulars.
Yeah.
That's all I kind of mentioned.
Do your research, find your own fit.
Yep.
Do the right
there you
thing.
go.
There you go.
There you go.
Fran, your turn. After that,
mine's pretty simple. It's really easy as we're doing this, because as we do each podcast, it's cause and effect, and it's really easy to focus on the doom and gloom. But you really got to put that aside and realize all that's there, yes, but all the great work that is being done out there to fix and correct it. And you really need to celebrate and focus on the good and push forward with that. So try not to be, really like, oh, we're losing quail and the deer are a problem and we lost this and that. You know what? These are all problems. Everything's fixable. I mentioned that last time. Everything's fixable. Move forward and focus on that. And I celebrate you, John, for the great work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Guys, thanks again for having me, and thanks for putting the word out about Working Lands for Wildlife, the Quail Initiative, and New Jersey Audubon. And again, we love we love Pinelands Nursery, and you guys are really doing some great work too. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
So, that about wraps it up. Thank you guys again for joining us today. Cool. We hope you enjoyed listening about quail management and the Working Lands. Sorry, just a little internal goof on.
I didn't update
Fran's throwing me for a loop here.
I'm throwing Tom curveballs. I put deer management.
It's like you wanted me to fail this.
No, I didn't. I put deer management instead of quail management.
So it's.
Sorry, Tom.
So we hope you enjoyed listening to all the things about quail and bringing quail back to New Jersey with John Park from New Jersey Audubon. Pre-show, we were saying how we can probably have 10 conversations not with John and New Jersey Audubon as a whole, and a lot of our guests. So we're looking forward to having them back on in the future. You can find even more about New Jersey Audubon and a lot of the projects they're doing by going to their website, which is www.njaudubon.org. Make sure you like their Facebook page, which is NJ Audubon, or at NJ Audubon. Their Twitter is also at NJ Audubon, and Instagram, again, at NJ Audubon. So, like I said, we plan on having you back, John, because you mentioned bog turtles in your 4 species that are on that program, and I know you guys have done some stuff with that as well. So
yes, we have.
There's a lot of conversations we want to have. We want to talk about riparian buffer bird habitat. There's a lot of things we want to talk about. So we're looking forward to that.
Anytime. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I'd like to give a big thank out to Stephen Marr for contributing our theme music. You can follow us on Twitter at Pineland Nursery, Facebook at Pinelands Nursery NJ, Instagram at Pinelands Nursery, and YouTube at Pinelands Nursery. And let's not forget the Native Plants Healthy Planet Facebook group. Man, it exploded the last couple of days. Everyone really proud and sharing what they've been doing on their own properties.
A lot of drought-tolerant garden picks, and then a lot of, hey, thank God it finally rained.
Yes. So make sure, if you're not a member, become a member, and we'll keep the conversation going there. Yeah.
You can listen to Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast directly at www.nativeplantshealthyplanet.com. You can also check us out at Podbean, Apple Podcasts. Leave a 5-star review while you're there. Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or you can even ask Alexa to play the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast. Thanks, everyone. I'm Tom.
And I am Fran. John, thank you again. We appreciate it
thank you
so
guys.
much. Anytime. And thanks again, everyone. We will see you again next time. Until then, keep it native.
Thank you for listening to the Native Plants Healthy Planet podcast, presented by Pinelands Nursery. Remember to like, share, follow, and comment.